All right, we are live. This is Live with Sondra. I'm your host, Sondra Shannon, the CEO of Gatemaster Technology, and your interviewer today for today's guest. I'm really excited about this topic today because we're going to be talking about something that I think is outside the scope of what we've had a lot of conversations about. It's a little bit different and it's even a little bit vulnerable. I'm really excited about this guest because she brought this topic to my attention. And when we started discussing it, I realized that this is something that is going to help a lot of people. So I'm very excited to talk to you today about the topic of from break up to breakthrough, thriving after a company split. So before we get started, I just want you guys, I want to ask you a question. I want to ask the audience a question today. As many of us have faced moments of professional upheaval, layoffs, splits, transitions, but how often do we view these as opportunities for breakthrough rather than a setback? And as you reflect on your own professional journey, what do you believe the single most transformative mindset or action you've taken that have turned professional breaks up into a strategic breakthrough? So before I continue on this conversation, I have to introduce you to today's guest. We have Aurora Elicerio on the show today. Aurora is a 20 years has 20 years in talent acquisition, DEIB, and team empowerment, and she's focused on inclusive solutions. She's a first generation college grad, an Army spouse, a child of immigrants, and bringing a unique perspective to her work. She holds a BA in anthropology and strategic HR integration certification. She is blending these things for academic and practical expertise. She's passionate about her early morning moments, her quiet early morning moments, and she finds energy in her sunrise routine. And as one of my uh, mentors always says, beat the sun up. So she's doing that, sounds like. Without any further ado, please let me introduce you to Aurora. Aurora, thank you for being on the show today.
Hi, Sandra. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. I really appreciate you being here today. And, I was hoping maybe, I hope that bio was okay, but I was hoping maybe you might tell our audience a little bit more about who you are. And, as I mentioned in the intro here, I know that this conversation is, I'm sure you've heard of Brene Brown. She says, rumbling with vulnerability. I feel like this conversation we're going to have today certainly highlights that part of business for many people. And, I'd love for you to introduce yourself to them.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm Aurora, what's nice is that I just a few years ago took my family name back. So the Spanish way of saying my last name is Elicerio, and for about 18 years of my professional career, I had a different last name, which was my married name. So I like to mention that because there's a lot of empowerment in taking my ethnic family name back. I identify as Mexican American. But as far as, why I'm excited to be talking to folks today is that very recently this year, I had a company breakup. So we had a reduction in force at my former organization. And I wanted to take this summer to really think about what do I love to do and what am I good at. Not going to lie, it was a really hard transition to be at a company for nearly 12 years. And so much of my identity was tied up in my work. Um, but it's really been a blessing. And when people I run into at Target or wherever, they say, "How are you doing?" I say, I needed this. I didn't know how much I needed this. I needed to be kicked out of the nest and really figure out what's next for me, because we can kind of put those blinders on and keep working. But as far as what I really want to share today is that you will be okay. Everyone's journey is different when they go through these types of transitions. Uh, but I want to share everything I know so that folks know that they're not alone.
Yeah. And I think like one thing that a lot of people maybe aren't talking about very often, especially with what you've been through, with the recent layoff, or, is that the heartbreak that comes with that,
Yeah.
right? Like, we maybe don't even know that that's possible until you experience that. I mean,
Yeah.
I would be lying if I didn't say that throughout my career, my work has broken my heart
Yeah.
several times, but you just got to keep going and you got to figure out like you've mentioned, what is that strategic breakthrough that this can bring to you, or where can this end up getting you on the other side when
Right.
everything's all said and done. So, I'm curious, with your recent layoff, what strategies have helped you stay resilient and visible within your industry?
Yeah. So it was almost a premonition. I'd say about 2 years ago, I was doing community work, representing my company, volunteering, sitting on boards, all of that. But as the years went on, I saw some of my colleagues that were impacted, long tenured, high performing people. And I thought, you know what? It's a matter of time before they call my number. So I wanted to make sure that I was networked beyond my industry. And I was in telecommunications before. So I was in the standard professional, organizations there, but I was also looking at my community work and how could I sit on boards in chambers of commerce or volunteer here or be part of a neighborhood association, because I thought there's going to be a time when I need to leverage this network. And sure enough, that's exactly what's happened. So that's something that you want to stay relevant and educated in your space, but also everyone has a thing that they love and they believe in. So what are those things and how can you be of service in those spaces and really get to know people in a way that's not like you're posturing professionally. You're there to, like I said, service or help. So that's something that I had so many folks genuinely say, I want to help you. And when someone says they want to help you, you take them up on it. You follow through, you come prepared, you value their time. And that is where I've really found a lot of like peace and support, is through my network beyond my industry. Still connected to my colleagues and all of that. But so I stay connected to my colleagues who are still at the company, folks who have moved on, and folks who have retired. So that is how I kind of stay grounded and aware of what's going on and what are some of the challenges and what are some of the wins that other people are experiencing.
Yeah, and I'm curious, what advice you have for professionals who are trying to stay connected to those colleagues.
Yeah.
Some people find that that's a difficult thing to do. I know networking for me is probably one of the hardest things I ever had to learn in business. If
Mhm.
I have actually been throwing my kids into it because I recognize that had I had that ability early on in my career, it would have it would have benefited me for sure.
Yep.
So I know that there are people listening today where they are terrified of this. And when we talk about networking, what I'm referring to is what you're saying, just staying connected
Mhm.
with people.
Yep.
Genuine, authentic connections. Find the people you like, find the people you can learn from.
Yep.
What would be some of your advice for staying connected?
Yeah. So you've got your in-person events, and I think that's what scares people. Like, I don't want to go to some mixer where I have to go around and hold a little appetizer plate and talk to people I've never met. Yeah, that is scary. I don't really prefer that as well. But, there are plenty of virtual things that you can do. Volunteer, if it is an in-person event, volunteer to, be the registration table person. You have a job to do, you're meeting people as they come in. So finding those places where you don't have to sit on a board. You don't have to be front and center giving presentations. You can just be there. Bring a buddy. That's another way to, kind of get your feet wet in that space, but also pay it forward. I've been
Okay.
very fortunate to have mentors and other folks like, let me know what you need. They'll come sit with me. They'll have coffee with me. But I'm also the wheels are always turning, thinking of like, who does this person need to meet, or who do I need to introduce this person to? And that's another way of staying networked and growing your network. I've gotten really good at doing email introductions. And so I'll introduce them that way. I get permission first from both parties. And I just kind of basically am their hype man. I tell them, this is why I love this person. This is how we met. This is why I think you all should be connected. Have at it. And I just kind of let them take it from there. And they'll do with it what they want. But that is something I'm always thinking about too, is, it's not an extracting relationship. You really need to think about how you can pay that forward to others.
Yeah, I love this because one of my mentors who has taught me about networking quite a lot and also about what it means to have a mentor, right? Like you said earlier, when you are staying connected to someone, stay genuine, follow up, be there. And by be there, correct me if I'm wrong, but what I'm hearing you say is like, be there, show up.
Yep.
What our mentors or people who are connecting us with those who can help us advance our careers or even just any professional help that we're receiving, maybe it's just training. But what I found from my mentors is that they want to see me be their biggest success story. Like that's all they could ask of me. They're
Yep.
a lot of times they're not even asking for anything monetary.
Yep.
They're just asking like take this knowledge and put it to work,
Yep.
right? Stay
Yep.
connected. But you know what also is interesting about what you said that I really can appreciate too is yeah, it's really scary to network with an appetizer plate. I don't even like to eat in front of people. That's a weird fact about me. I half the time I go to these events, I starve to death because I'm so hungry afterwards because
Yep.
I don't even like eating in front of people, let alone talking with food. And these are really stressful situations. But, it is so important to overcome some of the fear of staying connected to people. And, I have been involved in Women Impact Tech, which is an organization that helps with placement of women in the STEM and technology industries. And one of the things that the CEO had told me just a year ago was that in their research they had found that it was taking women, and I know this show isn't about women, but I just thought you would find this statistic very interesting,
Huh.
3 times as long to find their next
Yep.
career
Yep.
in the event that they are laid off or split up or transitioning from their companies. And when I asked her, I said, well, it's because we're women. She says, no, absolutely not. It's because our networks are not as wide.
Yeah.
We didn't know as many people,
Yeah.
which is crazy to me because women, if you know this about women, I also saw another statistic that part of the reason women live longer is because we have friends.
Mm. Yeah.
Isn't that funny?
Yeah, that's really, and that's something that actually I wanted to hit on, is, we're going to talk a little bit about self-identification and the questionnaires that employers are asking now. I've been very pleasantly surprised by some job descriptions that I've read. And one of them, or a few of them, specifically call out women applicants. And the way that they
Interesting.
call it out, yeah, the way that they call it out is they say, did you know, dot, dot, dot. This is in the job description. Did you know that statistically women are only likely to apply to jobs if they meet 100% the criteria for? Let's change that.
Interesting.
No one meets 100% of the criteria. And that's it. That's all that's said, which is so true. Talking about, going to your next thing is that we sometimes have this self-doubt or this super high expectation of ourselves as women that we're not even going to raise our hand unless we know we can do it double time, triple time. And that is how we sometimes stay in the shadows.
Yeah, I mean that's very interesting to me, and I can certainly relate, especially as a professional, a wife, a mom. I mean, I see that play out in so many areas of my life, right?
Yep.
Where you don't feel like you measure up. I mean, like this show is about real people, so I hope I can be that vulnerable and say like, yeah, I've been there, and I think most of us have. And that actually kind of leads me to the next question. When we talk about strategies that companies can implement that attract and retain underrepresented
Yep.
talent efficiently. I mean, you mentioned this where they're just calling it out in a way that's nice and lets women or look, I would say even men know like, hey, if you don't measure up 100%,
Yeah.
there still might be an opportunity here for you because at the end of the day, what we really want to see in our team members and the people that we're working with is that they're growing.
Yeah.
Right? I
Yeah.
mean, at least for me, that's how I feel about it. But I mean, you mentioned that, but I'm curious if there's any other strategies that companies can take.
Yeah. So, we have something in recruiting called, or in HR called a talent life cycle. And so what that is it's from the beginning, from the inception of how are you attracting and sourcing talent. So what's your story? What's the message on the street to prospective candidates? So starting from that piece of who's out there telling the story, how are you engaged? Just showing up at a career fair is never ever enough. It really needs to be, relationship with community organizations, with community colleges, technical colleges, so many spaces that it can't be just a once a year event. It needs to be, offering mentorship to students, for example, or speaking and, in some classes, that sort of thing. But I think when it comes to how are you attracting, what's the value proposition to come work for me, is to engage people outside of the recruiting team, because recruiting is usually a very small team. How can you engage people in the business to be ambassadors? So that's another way that you need to think about, who's on the street telling our story. So that is kind of the beginning of it, but the whole journey from sourcing, application, interviewing, offer, hiring, onboarding, engagement, all of that, all the way to exit, all of that is important because there's a lot of data throughout all of those steps. And so who's applying? Where are we getting them from? Are they interviewing? Where's the drop off? All of that. So really assessing that representation of where are we getting this talent from? Who's staying? Who's excelling? Who's leaving? And why? And that's where folks can take action on where are their gaps. Like, this is not the way that we were trying to move, or why are we left with, okay, we're getting really great talent in the door, but they're not staying. Why? And so really getting to the bottom of that and doing something with that information instead of it just being anecdotal, it feels like, or it seems like, really need to understand what's happening there and what can be done to fix it.
Well, and it's interesting that I love all of these things that you've given us in terms of how we can attract that type of talent, what we can do to nurture that journey for them. But also, one of the things that I've been learning recently that I'd never even really considered in my business, I mean, I've been doing this for 23, almost 25 years, is that I've got to be marketing the opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like, that's almost as important as marketing my product, marketing the opportunity for the people whom I want to attract, that I want to work side by side with. I have a silly saying. I'll give you the censored version. I always say I want to do cool stuff with cool people in my work. I mean, I didn't go into a fund industry for any other reason than I wanted to create experiences even amongst my team. And I think that's something that companies need to showcase more. What does that journey look like for them?
Yeah.
Are the people, even upon exit, are they better than?
Yeah.
And that was something that I did from the beginning. I had made a promise to myself and the company that anybody that touched this company would be better in all different ways. I mean, it's been different for everybody, but they would be better just by being touched by us. That was important to me.
Yeah.
And I don't know if a lot of companies think about that, but like you, I just had prior experience working for people where that wasn't the case, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm looking to create a world where, yes, work is hard. We have to do it. Some of us just have to do it because that's the world we live in. Bills got to get paid. The IRS wants their money. You know what I mean? But at the end of the day, how do we make this a better world for people? How do we make work better for all people? And I think that kind of brings me to my next question for you. You had mentioned earlier about self-identification and expansion. Can you share maybe one, what you mean by self-identification expansion, but also, how its potential impact on DIEB efforts?
Yeah.
Maybe bring that all together for us.
So we've got our standard, we've all heard of the EEOC, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. And so there are 3 questions that every employer of 100 or more typically will ask. And so those 3 questions have to do with your gender identity. So how do you identify your gender? your race, ethnicity, how do you identify there? And the third one is disability status. So those are the three typical ones. Check, 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 got it. And so the government does ask for reporting on that. But what I am seeing now more is expansion beyond that. So something as simple as, you have so many folks who identify as 2 or more races. In the past, that was it. Don't know what 2 or more races those are. Maybe there's one that you lean more than the other, or maybe they're both equal. But I am seeing some organizations ask, okay, 2 or more races. Okay, which 2 do you identify with? That's important because it really personalizes that experience for the individual that is applying or that works there. But I'm seeing some other creative ways of self-identification that are beyond those typical kind of outward appearance items. And those are first generation college educated. And so some folks are asking that because that does frame up a perspective in life. If you're the first generation in your family or in your family unit to go to college, it informs a lot about your relationship sometimes with money, your relationship with other people, with debt, with all kinds of stuff. Another one is whether as a child you qualified for free or reduced lunch. Again, it can relate to socioeconomic status. So that is another dimension of someone's identity that this is all voluntary, by the way, that some organizations want to know, like, how are we making up, say it's a very corporate setting that's traditionally all college educated folks, do we have a good representation of folks here who maybe didn't walk into this ivory tower like others, because this makes us a better, stronger company, having these different experiences that are maybe non-traditional from what we see every day. So that is where I'm really excited when it comes to inclusion and belonging, that these questions are being asked and being considered, because that has nothing to do with, I think, what people sometimes are fearful of, that DEI is only for women and people of color, for example. But it's for everybody, because feeling like you belong and that your experience is represented is incredibly important.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree, and that's very interesting. I didn't know that. I never thought about the first generation
Yeah.
college educated, which honestly, on my team, I have quite a few people who
Mm-hmm.
are in that space.
Yep.
And to be honest, they're very proud of that too. So,
Yes.
and they should be,
Yeah.
right? They should be. I have team members who are first generation in this country.
Yes.
And you're right. Maybe some of the needs are a little bit different with regards to mentoring,
Yep.
because I think that's why that information is important, because like you said, I mean, I'm certainly a free lunch kid.
Mm-hmm.
So, that
Yeah.
was something that was an experience that I had, so that resonates with me.
Yeah.
But if I meet somebody like me who's had that experience, I also know that, like you said, the conversations around money are very different.
Yep. Yeah. Exactly.
Because nobody talked to me about money growing
Yep.
up.
Same.
Nobody ever talked to me about money. Financial education is something I'm super passionate about, but that's because it was something that was lacking from my own life, that I found that I needed to get right on in
Yep.
order to be able not only to serve my team and the community that I work in, the industry that I work in, but also, I'm on a mission of impact, right?
Yeah.
So it was a big eye opener for me when I realized, hey, I don't really know much about money.
Yeah. Absolutely. And that's very vulnerable to say that.
Yeah.
So I have a group of friends that, we all reached the status at the company where we were making more money than our parents did. And
Yeah.
so we had kind of a lunchtime virtual meeting where someone broke down the P&L for us. And we talked about benefits and we talked about restricted stock units. What does that mean? Because it is a very vulnerable thing to say, I don't know how to navigate this. But when you're around other people who are coming into it kind of with a freshly or new perspective, who aren't gonna scoff or make assumptions about you, that's incredibly important to have that safety and space with people.
Well, and I will say this, I now teach financial education. I teach at a couple of medical aesthetics colleges. So I teach women who have achieved these certifications how to then go monetize this. And because it was important that I pass that forward. And, I'm only getting older, so I like medical aesthetics.
Yeah.
I think it's a great industry, and it's something
Mhm.
that I really I love teaching them because most of them are going on to be business owners, and I want to help them be empowered with that. But what I think is interesting about what you said is over the years, what I've learned is that those that are doing better than me with regards to having an understanding of money,
Mhm.
they were always willing to help me.
Yeah.
It was the one it were and this and I hope this is okay to say on this
Yeah.
conversation, but it was people who didn't know.
Yeah.
Oftentimes they were the one side eyeing me for not knowing these things or making
Mhm.
me feel bad because I didn't have that same amount of information. But that was one rule that one thing that I noticed in life as I have been on my own professional journey is that those that actually had the information,
Yeah.
they were willing to share it if you ask the right questions. Make
Right.
me feel good about wanting to be better.
Yep. Yep. Exactly.
Right. So, I love that you're sharing this, and just kind of going back because I'd like to make sure that those who are watching have the information. I know you have a lot of valuable information, but I'm curious, with regards to organizations, if they are to decode cultural scripts and support career mobility for
Yeah.
marginalized groups, what steps can they take? I know
Yeah.
you mentioned the questions, but in addition to that, what can be done?
Yeah. So I'll kind of level set with what I mean by cultural scripts. So you've got cultural scripts, and I'll talk about my experience because that's easiest to talk about. So I
Sure.
mentioned earlier that I identify as Mexican American, and so I did some research on what are some things that show up in my culture that may be impeding me or helping me professionally. And so one of those things that I learned and I share in as many spaces as possible. And I know that this connects with a lot of people, not just people who identify as Latino, but is a term called paternalism. And so paternalism is the idea that your company will take care of you like a father would, meaning that if you keep
Mm,
your head down, you work, you will be rewarded. And in my experience, as how I show up and how I've always shown up, um, I can just kind of literally keep my head down and work, 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 and all it got me was more work. And so understanding, who's maybe subscribing to that. A lot of women in general do, but also people who are children of immigrants or immigrants themselves will have this idea that like just don't make a fuss, just do your work, do your work, do your work, do your work. And so they may not be the ones raising their hand saying, I'm ready for that, or I want that opportunity, or I feel like I've earned this next job. I'm going to go for it. They keep waiting to be tapped on the shoulder. They keep waiting for
yeah.
someone to present that opportunity to them. And that's how folks can lag behind. So, as organizations, as leaders, observing that, observing who's performing well, but maybe doesn't have the confidence or isn't saying, pick me. Um, really taking that, being responsible to ask those questions and dig deeper into why, what's going on
Right.
here. And not just taking that for face value. I think a lot of times too, for me, people ask me, do you want people leadership? And this was years ago, but I'd be like, no, 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 I don't want that. Well, why? Well, no one really asked me why. They just like, okay, and they moved on. So understanding, what are the motivators of your teammates and maybe what are some of the things that are beautiful, wonderful culturally. And when I say culturally, it's just, that's just a context of like how you came up, how you were raised, and doesn't necessarily have to do with like ethnic culture. But how does it show up? As far as, what can leaders do to learn? There's a lot of just gender dynamics and gender norms that just start there with maybe how
Yeah.
the more quiet folks are, and how can you just kind of uncover that and challenge people to see in themselves what maybe you already see in them.
Yeah, well, and I love that because, one of the things that do teach when I teach financial education is changing. And I like how you said it's scripts. I usually say like negative beliefs, right?
Mhm.
But changing the script, right? We have
Yep.
to change the script. We got to go off script sometimes. And you mentioned earlier, there was a point where you made more money than your parents. I've been there. And
Yep.
then I lost a parent that I could talk about money with because they can't wrap their head around what that is. And
Mhm.
that's not necessarily a bad thing. Actually, one of my mentors, because that was a real struggle for me, was like, why aren't they happy for me? Well, because they don't understand, right? They
Right.
are happy. They
Yeah.
just that it's just beyond what they're where they're at,
Yep.
right? And one of
Yep.
my mentors taught me that fantastic. I don't know if you ever heard of Elena Cardone, but she wrote an amazing book called How to Build an Empire, and I did her masterminds. And one of the things that she taught me in the first mastermind that I'd ever gone to her with which completely changed my world, was that there are people that you just talk about weather and roads with. And sometimes that's the people closest to us because have they have a hard time with that level of success
Yeah.
and the place where you're at. And so within our organizations, I do believe we've got to give people a chance to have someone to talk to.
Yeah.
And I say that because I mentioned to you that within our organization, we have people like me who are free lunch kids, grown up in Los Angeles.
Mhm.
I have first generation employees who are and team members who are first generation and first generation educated, college educated, and you would be surprised because I do an exercise with my team every year where we talk about their 1, 3, and 5 year goals with their permission, of course.
Yeah.
But you'd be surprised how often I hear, this is really embarrassing for me
Mm.
to have a goal this big.
Yeah.
But I also want to welcome them to have an opportunity to talk about money and finances and the things that they need to know about, because at the end of the day, I mean, we've talked a lot about money today, which is interesting with regards to HR, but at the end of the day, your people's money problems will become the problems of the business, especially if their belief is low,
Yes. Absolutely. Yep.
right?
Yep. Yep.
So, do you mind if we switch over to talking about personal storytelling and career development?
Uh-huh.
I know that's something that you are passionate about, and I'm curious, how can personal storytelling, like we've been doing today, amplify career growth, especially for those with a diverse background?
Yeah. So I failed to mention in the beginning of my intro that, when my role was eliminated and I was, in my call it it was my summer sabbatical. I took some rest and visited family, did all that. I'm like, okay, I'm ready to get a job now. I continued to do like speaking engagements and everything. And I had a couple of friends that were like, Aurora, you need to start charging people for this. Quit doing it for free. And I'm like, but I like to do it. And that was something that, I didn't think that, if well, if I started a consulting business, what would I consult about? And I already knew the answer to these things. And so, fortunately, I think I had more people believe in me than I did at the time. But I did. I started my consulting business, EOS Edge, which EOS is the Greek goddess of dawn, which is a take on my name, Aurora. So I'm like, oh, I love that. But I started a consulting business, and I realized once I sat down and kind of took pen to paper about, if I were to do trainings on, talent acquisition basics, what would I include? It was exciting. I hadn't, I guess, given myself enough credit for my 20 years that I could just go at it, research it. I started to go to virtual conferences. I went to real life conferences, all of that, because I wanted to make sure that what I was sharing wasn't old information and it wasn't,
Yes.
information just from telecommunications. I wanted it to be industry agnostic and relevant to no matter the industry. So, but part of that I always talk about is storytelling. So people are going to put you in a box no matter what, and it's going to be based on their understanding of the world, their experience. So you've got your things that, I present as a woman, so they're going to assume I'm a woman or identify as a woman. I have olive skin tone. Okay, not sure she's ethnically ambiguous. Not really clear on this last name. So taking that and really kind of owning, um, what you want the world to know about you and getting really good at it. So there's a woman, her name's Virginia or Ginny Clark. She's got a lot of great content out there. But she talks about how to give your story. And part of your story is informing folks, a little bit of how, what informs your world, what's important to you, and what do you want to achieve. And that's really important, I think, for folks who maybe aren't, they're used to being the only one in a room, because there's so many layers there that when I share, I'm Mexican American, I'm from Flint, Michigan, went to Michigan State, I'm one of 6 children, but I have no children myself. I was married to an active duty Army explosive ordnance disposal technician. So I share all of these things, and there's those moments where someone's like, "Oh, I'm from Michigan too," or "Oh, I was an Army spouse," or "I am an Army spouse," or "My brother was in the Army." There's so many things. There's so many layers to us that we can reveal to folks, and that is how we stay connected with people who maybe look completely different than you, grew up in a different part of the world, different religion, different everything, but being able to share those stories and having, understanding to what level of depth is this safe to go to, is how you can bring others in while still showing all of the kind of the beautiful colors of yourself. So that's why it's so important, I believe, and I think it's always relevant to share your story. I love it when I go to any sort of event and someone has like a picture of them, like as a little kid, with their family, or them crying as a little baby or something, anything like that. And there's always a story there in that picture. And that's kind of what puts everybody at ease and really gets folks' attention when you start there instead of just going right into the business. So that's where I hope to see, especially when it comes to executive teams, comfortable telling their story, because we're going to make assumptions like, "Oh, well, they'll never understand us." They've been in that place for so long. It's so important that everyone knows how to tell their story.
Yeah, I completely agree because I think the storytelling is not only a way for people to get to know who you are and the depth that you've mentioned,
Yeah,
but also, it's how we change belief of the people around us,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And if one of the things that I loved about one of my mentors had made a promise that if they ever made it, they would share that information with people because,
yeah,
they had a story to tell. And I wish that more and more successful professionals would take that time to storytell. It's a vulnerable place to be for
it
real.
is.
I mean, like I totally understand why that's difficult for people, but at the end of the day, I can't tell you how many people come up to me and say, "I heard you talk about this on your show and that resonates with me because I also have this background," or "I think that's so great that you've overcome this thing," or it's been interesting doing this show the last few years because I do tend to get that feedback, and it's always very uh I'm trying to think of the right word. It's just it's nice.
Yeah,
It's nice that people are appreciating knowing somebody, because I think that is something that we're missing in the workplace
hmm,
is I don't know where that stigma comes from. Why can't we be friends with the people we work with? Why can't we know the people we work with? These are the people we
right,
spend most of our day with,
absolutely. Yep.
sometimes more than our families. So,
Yeah,
why not find that common ground and create a more peaceful environment, maybe even one where you're more aligned because of the information that's been shared.
right.
I really love that storytelling piece.
Yeah,
And if you are watching in the audience, I do hope that you figure out how to tell your story, because each and every one of us has an amazing story to tell.
absolutely.
And I'm curious, what role has your lived experience played in shaping your career and approach to talent development? You've mentioned so much about
Mhm.
who you are and your background,
Yep.
but what in that is shaping that talent development?
Yeah. So, I had mentioned earlier that, I earlier in my career and even with my previous organization, I had head down, work, work, work. And those moments where I realized, this isn't serving me. Um, when I talk to people and I start to hear, which I would have like professional coaching discussions with folks at many layers or many levels in the organization. When I hear that self-deprecating talk, or
Yeah.
because we all have it, um, I feel very comfortable telling people, like, don't, you can say that to me, but don't say that in your interview, or just keep it in your head, or let's talk through that. Why couldn't you do that? Or don't say I was just a this, or I just did that. All of these little filler words may not, you think don't mean much, but someone can poke holes in that. And so, when I have those conversations with people, I try to first share, like, hey, these are all the things that I think I did wrong. And these are the things, the levers that I pulled to make it right. I want to tell you everything. And
Yeah.
so that was, when I think of like my approach to talent development, I sum it up easily in 2 words: access and awareness. And so when we think of like access, like who has access to those development opportunities, to that next job, to that networking gig, whatever the situation is, who's accessing that? Um, is it fair? Are we putting it out there? And as far as like awareness, are we being transparent? Are people aware what's available to them? I'm always of the mindset of, like, none of this should be secret. We should share as much as we can and be honest about things. Something that, I've heard folks say in the past have been, everybody owns their career. Well, to an extent, you do. There's always going to be people that will be the decision makers. You can't just go in there and be like, give me this job because I did XYZ. This is where the networking comes into play. This is where I would explain to folks that networking isn't kissing butt. It's not, any of that. You can be your very real self in those spaces, but people need to know what you're about. They don't know what you're about unless you are there getting the story right face to face with them or in some capacity, so that when you leave the room, they're telling the right story about you. And so, like, things like brand, we hear a lot about your personal brand, all of that. We mentioned earlier about mentorship. Mentorship is wonderful, but what folks oftentimes fail to access and prioritize is sponsorship. So a sponsor is someone
Yeah.
that is a decision maker that will speak on your behalf for you, and they are putting their name behind you. They're going to make sure that they are your advocate in every space possible. That's what a sponsor does. That's the change maker for someone's career. A mentor absolutely is, and they can be, one person can be both, but a sponsor is what a lot of people fail to prioritize. Sponsors are incredibly, incredibly important in someone's career.
Oh, I early on in my career, because I was the youngest and the only woman on the team and the only brown one, right?
Yeah.
Like it was and I say all the time, like, honestly, being a woman and brown were not the hardest things. Being the youngest with no experience was definitely the hardest part of that
Mhm.
early stage of my career, because I didn't have a lot of information. I myself am a college dropout, so that was a big challenge for me
Mhm.
early on in my career. But you're right. There was one man who sponsored me, the founder of this company. And there were times when conversations were being had and ideas and decisions need to be made. And there were people trying to exclude me from that conversation. And he always made sure that I had a voice.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that you're 100% right about not only being a sponsor,
Yes.
but finding your champions
Yes.
within the organizations who are going to do that, because he knew who I was.
Yeah.
And that the information that I was sharing, while sometimes I needed more information, which to me is just kind of young professionals.
Yeah.
I love young professionals so much because the spirit and the passion,
Mhm.
all of that is still in them because
Yeah.
they haven't bumped up against all the negative experiences, and hopefully they never will. My
Mhm.
my vision for the world is that we're going to change that.
Yeah.
But, what I love about young professionals is that they are eager to learn. They are eager to share their ideas and have people listen to them and sponsor them, as you said. It's so important.
Yep.
That's probably, in my opinion, probably the gold of the show today
Yeah.
is making sure that within organizations you are being a sponsor or you are finding a sponsor,
Yes.
because that was huge for me.
Yep.
That
Absolutely.
was huge for me.
Yep.
One other thing too that I wanted to mention, when I was young, some of the bigger mistakes that I made was not being my authentic self, right? Like I thought I had to be one of the guys. I didn't dress up the way that I do today, which is actually me.
Hmm.
A lot of people don't know this about me. I was a commercial actress as well as a model. Like
Hmm.
fashion was in me,
Yeah.
but I went into technology and I started dressing more
Yeah.
like the guys.
Yeah.
And I started behaving more like the guys. And it was one of the worst things that I ever did because I
Mm-hmm.
had to pull myself back into being my authentic self, which luckily was made easy for me because I became CEO of the company in 2012, so I was still very young and I could transition
Hmm.
to that, being that real person. But I think, or being my authentic self, I think is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
There were things that there reasons why I say this is that I had some negative experience with customers who later found out that I was not the person that I was showing them.
Yeah.
And after that point, I'll tell you guys, it's one of the biggest deals I ever made in my career, which led to me becoming the CEO of the company. I didn't put on my authentic self when I made that deal. Now, I didn't lie to
Hmm.
them or do anything along those lines, but I think because I didn't do the storytelling piece that you're talking about,
Yeah.
they ended up taking advantage of me. They stole my ideas and my work, and it
Mm.
ended up being one of the biggest heartbreaks of my career. And if
Yeah.
I take responsibility, I believe that that had more to do with the fact they didn't know me.
Yeah. Yep.
And the reason they didn't know me is because I was afraid. I was afraid that they would find out that I was, um, you know, of Mexican descent from
Mhm.
Los Angeles,
Yeah.
eh, uneducated, young, a mom. I was hiding those things that really are me and
Yeah.
should have been hidden.
Yep.
And I think because that seemed unauthentic to them, they felt that that was something they didn't owe me. Uh, I'm trying to think of the right word here, but they didn't owe me their honesty either,
Yeah.
right?
Right. Right. Yeah.
So, I only tell that story because that really resonates with me for that reason. If I just look back on my 20 plus years, the things that I've done wrong and the things that I've done right, you know, really speaking who I am in the workplace and to the people around me
Yeah.
has made a huge difference. And I wish that somebody had given me permission, like you're doing today, to do that much
Yeah.
earlier in my career.
Yeah. And I will say, there are psychological benefits to saying your story out loud. And,
Yeah.
once you are comfortable doing that, and you're always, fine tuning it again based on the audience, based on the situation, um, there's no turning back. Like I don't know how else to be anymore. Like this is who I am. This is who I always was. And it was very freeing to be able to do that. And my confidence grew, my career progressed, because I was very, very comfortable standing on that sort of literal, sometimes stage, telling what I had experienced and how that informed how I'm navigating things, how I want to help people, my commitment to helping people, because, why should someone sit in for many years not realizing that they're capable of more? Uh, they need to hear it. Okay, well, how do we get there? Let's talk about it. Let's do it together. So that's part of me being able to find those words that really articulate my experience and what I'm doing with that information now.
Yeah. No, that's lovely. That's lovely, and I appreciate you being here today. So just before and I could keep talking about this topic forever. This is one of this is one of my favorite shows. Thank you for
Yeah,
being here today because
yeah,
I think I think there's a lot of power in being yourself,
yeah,
and there's a lot of power in being an organization that allows people to fully express themselves while
yeah.
still being aligned on a mission and with the values of a company and the vision of the future and what that looks like. And a lot of that has to do with just understanding people.
Yes.
And so, thank you for giving us a little more clarity on what that looks like. If I know you mentioned that you have started your own company.
Yep.
If there's anyone watching today that could use your help or would like to connect with you, what's the best way they can get a hold of you?
Yeah. So it's just my first name and last name at gmail.com. I don't have a website yet, but it's Aurora Elicerio at gmail.com or LinkedIn. I try to hop on LinkedIn a couple of times a day. That's another space that I encourage people to leverage. That's another way you can tell your story or show people what's important to you. It's free. Why folks don't take advantage of it, I'm not sure. But it's a really good way to dip people's toe into social media. But yeah, Aurora Elicerio at gmail.com.
And thank you so much, Aurora, for being here and for sharing
Yeah,
these insights. And I just adore you. I love this conversation. I
thank
can't thank
you.
you
Same.
enough. Well, thank you. We'll talk soon.
Okay. Thanks, Shannon. Or thanks, Sondra.
Well, isn't that great? I love conversations like this where we are talking about the human experience, the people involved in the businesses, the things that we need to do both as organizations and individuals to move business forward, to create a better world. That's what I really heard from this conversation today is this big vision that I even have for the world on how we can make, look, work's hard. They don't call it work because it's easy. I say that all the time to my team, but we can make it easier on each other by being our real authentic selves, by accepting and creating a space for everybody. So thank you again, Aurora, for being on this show. And if you are somebody like our guest today that has something that they would like to share with the world, our audience, that would help them move business and industries forward, I would love to hear from you. I would love to have you on the show. I'd love to interview you. And I always say that I'm the lucky one because I learned so much from every single one of these guests who have been so generous with their time and sharing this information. People don't have to do that. There's a lot of gatekeeping in the world, but every single one of these guests that have come on my show have offered something to all of you. And as we wrap up today, I just want to encourage you to be that person who also shares something that's going to help move business forward. And you can find a link to be on the show. The show submission form is on livewithsondra.com. And I encourage you to go over there and check it out. You can also see our recap blogs as well as our podcast. If you're listening to this on any of the podcast networks, I want to thank you for listening today. I also, if you are watching this on one of our recaps or replays, please hashtag replay, leave a comment, let us know that you're here. My guests would love to hear from you, and I'd love to hear from you as well. So thank you again for being here today. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your support, and thank you to the team that helps make this possible. I appreciate y'all so much. Take care, everybody.